So Attila, good to see you. Thanks so much for doing this.
That's fine. It's like it was lovely to meet you at Edinburgh last year. So we've just been talking about the whole process. I mean, well done for coming over and doing this, trying this great experiment that you did. As I say, I mean, thanks to PBH Free Fringe, the Edinburgh Fringe is now to some degree what it should be. I mean, it's still the main part of it is still horrible corporate and a complete and utter insult to the spirit which started it. And I was part of that really in the early 80s. I did the assembly rooms for 70% of the door when it was basically a squat in 1982. But yeah, I mean, the PBH Free Fringe just brought it back. You know, pay what you can, pay what you want shows, and if you're good and you've got a following, like then it works. And I've done it for years now. It brought me back, as I say, 7 years ago. And it was nice to meet you. And I'm sorry I didn't get to see your show, but as we both know, that it was on at the same. We were on at the same time.
Yes,
So, you know.
I look forward to coming back to the Fringe, and I'm going to make sure that that conflict does not occur. I'm going to do
Well,
everything I
I'm
can.
doing the same time again, you know. So, and this year I'm doing because I can quite easily. I'm doing 14 different shows in 14 days. So I've got I've been doing this for 43 years. I've got. I mean, I'm put it like this: in 2004, when we were battling to save our soccer team, you call it, Brighton Hove Albion, now playing in Europe, but then nearly extinct, I did a 10.5-hour sponsored gig where I didn't even stop to have a piss because I took the mic in the toilet with me, and I raised over £2,000 for the club. And I did that with, and I still had material left over, even though some of it wasn't very good. And I did do an hour of covers and things. By now, I reckon I've maybe got 30 hours. So I'll be doing 14 hours of completely different material, like no song or poem repeated twice in 2 weeks of performances. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I really enjoyed your show. I mean, fortunately, you did have one deviation in your schedule, so I was able to catch one of your shows.
Yes.
So yeah, I was very happy I was able to see you live. So let's kind of start at the beginning. I've been following you for literally 20 years now, but
How did you first hear about me? Just a moment. Was it from David Rovics?
It was a combination of David Rovics, and also I just found Guy Fawkes's Table.
Right, sure. Yeah.
I just found it online, and I think you were the video I first saw. You were singing it with David, and I was like, "Oh, I know that guy. Who's this other guy?" And then I became an Attila the Stockbroker fan.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah. David is a very good, very principled, decent guy who writes great songs. He really is. I mean, I don't agree with everything that he does, but he is a great songwriter, and he really puts himself on the line, and he stands up for what he believes in, which is what I try and do as well. So absolutely, I have huge respect for him.
Same. Yeah, same. That's a very excellent summary. So let's just kind of start at the beginning for anyone who might not be familiar with you. How would you describe what you do as Attila the Stockbroker?
Well, I mean, now it is so ridiculously. I describe myself as genre fluid. Really, I started off I came out of the punk scene. I was the bass player in punk bands. The bands kept splitting up. In 1980, I was writing songs. I jumped up on stage in between bands, started reciting the lyrics of my songs from the bands that I'd been in that split up, and developed very quickly into a performance poet. I'd always written poetry. Words have always been really important to me. And I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time, in the sense that very, very soon, my first single, which is a spoken word single, double A side with Seething Wells, another performance poet, ranting poetry. We called ourselves Ranting Poets. It was picked up by John Peel. He played it a lot. Got me a deal with Cherry Red Records. And I really carried on ever since. So essentially, I started off as a performance poet who played a little-faced electric mandolin and did shouty songs. The mandolin was smashed over my head by Nazis at a fight in 1982. I got mandola, Nelson, I call him Nelson Mandola, which is an octave lower than a mandolin and sounds a lot better. And from then till now, I've been performing my spoken word poetry and my songs all over the world. And in 1994, I always knew I would. I got a band together to play them. I've always had an instinctive love of early music. I've always wanted to combine early music and punk, so I did that a few years ago in 2018 with an album called Restoration Tragedy. I play an awful lot of early music instruments: crumhorn, cornemuse, Rauschpfeifer, shawm, bombard, plus obviously violin, viola, mandola, mandocello, all kinds of things. Yeah, so I'm in a band that combines early music and punk. I'm a spoken word performer. I also have just done a dub poetry album because one of my friend's sons became a really big reggae producer. So basically, what I've done, I've earned my living for 43 years doing what I love. And the greatest thing of all about it for me, it is now completely indefinable. I mean, I do so many different things, but it all effectively stems from the DIY indie sort of left-wing culture that I come from, and it's all connected in some way with punk, in the sense that, you know, my dub poetry thing has came out of I've always loved reggae and dub. That came out originally from really effectively, although I knew about it before, from the love of the Clash, the early music thing, which is a classical thing combined with again with punk, in the same kind of way that the Pogues combined Irish music and punk, and my sort of acoustic stuff is, you know, it is folky but with a very punky edge. You know, I actually turned David Rovix from a floral shirt wearing hippie into a hardcore sort of punk troubadour.
Really?
Yeah, that was me that did that. So yeah, he'll be the first to acknowledge it too. I mean, it was brilliant, you know. So yeah, I mean, that's what I do. I've done it for 43 years. I'm all over the internet. I'm all over Facebook and you know, and YouTube, and you'll find me everywhere. And I'm doing all kinds of things. I've just done a video for a festival in North Korea, which may or may not be shown. We'll wait to see. Which has actually come via the auspices of the EU. It's a very, very long story, but also I won't go into it now because I'm not a supporter of the regime of North Korea, but I am very much in favour of expanding, you know, I mean, basically of expanding the cultural horizons thereof, and to be the first sort of Western punk band effectively to be on TV in the DPRK will be quite fun. So we'll see what happens with that. Yeah, and I'm doing all kinds of stuff. I'm writing, you know, gigging all over the place. Just what I've always done, really. I've always said, you know, I've earned my living for 43 years doing something that I would do as a hobby if I couldn't earn a living out of it. And you can't say better than that. I've just started getting my state pension. I'm 66 now, and I'm not retiring in any sense.
Love to hear it. Yeah, that's incredible. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, kind of your early days. You know, a lot of the stuff I hear about the early punk scenes in those days, it's from, you know, reading Henry Rollins' books when he talks about, you know, Black Flag here in Southern California, and then going over to the UK and some of the bands that were around then in the 80s. And how did you perform in those rooms just armed with your words?
Well, I'll tell you one thing to begin with. I saw Black Flag's first ever London show
Okay.
at the 100 Club in early 1982, and it's an incredible story because at the time, as well as doing what I do as Attila the Stockbroker, I was freelancing as a music journalist for a newspaper called Sounds, which, like most of the music press, no longer exists, and you know, longer exists because of obviously of digital and everything that's happened and the internet and all that stuff. And the internet, and so yeah, so but at that time I was freelancing for Sounds. I wanted to see, I'd heard about Black Flag, I wanted to see the band, and they were playing at the 100 Club, which is a very well-known UK London rock venue, but which at that time, for a very short period of time, was being run, infested by Screwdriver and their mates, sort of far-right neo-Nazi band. So I went to this gig to see Henry Rollins and ended up having a long discussion, well, a 10-minute discussion in the middle of the gig with Ian Stewart, the lead singer of Screwdriver, surrounded by his acolytes, expecting to get my head kicked in, but you know, I was quick and everything. That didn't happen. But I certainly remember the Black Flag's first ever performance in England. To put it in a nutshell, if you got up on stage doing what I was doing at that time, especially if you were an anti-fascist poet performing in venues and in situations where there were people in the audience who considered themselves to be fascists, then you got into fights. And our whole point about what I was doing was I was aiming, you know, I was aiming to take poetry to places where it doesn't normally go, and I was aiming to convince people, you know, of the error of their ways if they were involved or influenced by sort of far right ideology. And since most of the people at the gigs weren't convinced fascists, but 15, 16-year-old working class kids who just had shit all their lives and were being lied to by a load of older people who were saying, yeah, if you come with this gig, you can beat up some lefties. I was very successful in that, although I did get a lot of stick and I did get into a lot of aggro. But, we came through it. But it was, when you try and explain to people now what it was like in the early 80s, not just in London, but all over the UK, where you will go to a gig knowing that there was going to be a fight and knowing that there would be trouble with right-wing boneheads, knowing that it was an incredible time. When I think of some of the things that I got up to and some of the things that happened in those days, bloody hell, that's, it's just impossible to explain it now because it doesn't happen now, fortunately. There's an even bigger threat from the far right now than there was then because they don't wear Doc Martens and shave their heads anymore. They're in government and looking like, it's a possibility they might get into government in the US. And obviously right across mainland Europe, it's a completely different culture. Many things have got better. Let's not forget that, in terms of all the other types of absolute garbage, the racism, the sexism, the homophobia that was just open in the early 80s that isn't there now. Loads of that's got better. And of course, they're trying to turn the clock back about that. But in terms of gigs, it was shit then. It really was. It was incredibly inspiring. And people say to me, don't you get nervous before shows? And I'm playing a nice 100-seat sort of hall somewhere or back room in a pub packed with my fans. Don't you get nervous? I said, well, I started off in 1980 and I was getting chairs and bins and glasses thrown at me and was attacked on stage by Nazis a few times and had my mandolin smashed over my head. So playing to you lot who come to see me and are really nice and friendly and want to buy my stuff. No, I don't get nervous at all. It's brilliant. That's it. It was incredible. Some of the stuff that went on was absolutely incredible, but one of the things that honed my skills as a performer was that I knew. So whether or not they were fascists or whatever, because most of the time they were. It wasn't like every single gig there was trouble. At certain gigs you would know there was going to be trouble, but a lot of the time there were just big audiences who come to see a band, and you were going on, you were doing the support, and it was up to you to get them in with a style of performance that hadn't been seen before, because this is the other crucial thing, of course. I started right at the beginnings. The ranting poetry thing that we started in the early 80s coincided with the beginnings of what was called in the first place was called the alternative comedy scene, which then became, it started off as a new variety. So it was basically bills with people like me, jugglers, face painters, mime artists and comedians. Then it became alternative comedy because that was the thing that was most commercially viable. And so more and more was comedians, but I still did those gigs. And then it was kind of new comedy, and then it was comedy, by which time, I didn't fit in. I didn't feel part of it anymore, because the whole culture that I was from was that the people were coming to listen and to be inspired and entertained, but not specifically to hear jokes or at a venue where the yardstick was, or the gig where the yardstick was. It's a success if people are laughing, because that's not what I do. As you know, I love to make people laugh. Humor is a huge part of what I do. But I say humor. My slogan is love humor, hate comedy, because I love making people laugh. But 5 minutes later, I want to make them cry. And I hate the relentless, idea of stand-up that if you don't get 20 laughs in 10 seconds, then I've got a poem about this, which I think I've told you about, called Comic in a Basket, which if you haven't heard it already, you should. It's on the internet, I'm sure you'll find it, which is just about how it started, when I started off in the early 80s, and it changed from being just anything goes to precisely being that kind of gag every 10 seconds, all your history, script writing comedy, script writing gag team, comedy factory, roll on, roll off, are you with the agency, too controversial, no good for TV, comedy to go, careers in comedy, comic in a basket, comedy package, corporate hospitality, comic in a basket, 70s TV, advert shopping, routine, 70s TV, old people shopping, routine, very funny, Daily Express, comic in a basket, hilarious, Daily Mail, comic in a basket, get your dicks out for the banks and give your sponsors grateful thanks. That's just a little bit of it. I've done it for years, so I can't even remember it properly. But yeah, it was all about that, really. But yeah, I've always followed my own path, done my own thing, and I'm happy to say I've always earned my living at it. I've always I have lots of people interested in what I'm doing, and I've never ever been famous or kind of flavour of the month in the mainstream at all, but always had. It's always worked, and I've always said my mantra is I want to be as well known as I get, but entirely on my own terms. I'm not interested in fitting in with anybody or fitting into anyone else's agenda. I just do my own thing. That's me. It's like just me on my own terms. That's what I do. Like, this is me. Like it or take it or leave it. Simple as that.
You're an inspiration to everyone trying to do the same. And when you're describing the comedy thing, you hit upon why I really enjoy, and I know this kind of just came up organically, but I wanted to ask you about it more specifically. Things like the Edinburgh Fringe, where you're working on an hour show. So as a stand-up, there is still that pressure of, the laughs per minute and stuff like that. But when you're doing an hour and it's like a conceptual hour show that people came to see, you can kind of take them on a journey where you do like a story or something like that. You might not want to open with it, but you can kind of, once they trust you, you don't have those pressures quite as much, and you can take them on a different journey. And that's why I really migrate to things, like the Fringe Festival world and stuff like that. So I was wondering, could you speak a little bit? And again, some of it came up organically, but just the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and how that played a role in your career, past and present, because your article was incredibly brilliant.
Well, thanks. I mean, I would say it's because I never set out to get spotted, or I never get reviews when I go to Edinburgh. No one takes any notice of me from the movers and shakers. I don't expect them to. They know I'm there. They're not interested. Going right back to the early 80s when I started to do it, it was a completely different time. As I say, I played the assembly rooms, which for those, obviously, since this is mainly a US sort of podcast, most people won't know what that is. The assembly rooms is the most prestigious venue at the Fringe, and it's now you have to pay thousands of pounds a week now, tens of thousands to get a slot there. When I started, we did it for 70% of the door on a door split, and there was me and Seething Wells and Little Brother and Ben Zephaniah and Jules Denby, just punk poets, 70% of the door between us. So basically, I mean, it's always been just something that I've enjoyed doing for a period. From 82 to about 91, I enjoyed doing it. And then it all changed, and it stopped being sort of door splits and everything, and became this corporate horribleness where you basically have to pay in advance to get the room and all the rest of it. And then you got a door split after a certain. It was just basically you went up there and you lost money. Now this is my living. All right. This is my living. I earn my living as a performer. So I'm not going to do gigs where I don't make money. And the idea that I might get spotted by a TV show or get an advert for Coca-Cola or something out of it. I mean, I won't do those things. I've been offered, Nike and all kinds of garbage. I won't do that sort of shit. I'm not interested in it. And I'm not interested in fitting into anyone's stupid TV character shows or whatever either. I just do what I want. So basically for me, that while it was a place where I could do gigs and get a percentage of the door, brilliant. When they started telling me you got to pay to play, that was bollocks. So I was off, because of course the other side of what I do is, I'm doing all these gigs all over the place, and August is a huge time for festivals, and I do a lot of music festival gigs. I used to. I'm beginning to wind those down now because I'm really not into camping anymore. It's one of the few things that age has done. So there was all these other gigs for me to do, all the festivals and everything. So I just stopped. And then precisely a few years ago, it was about 2014 or something, I heard about this new concept where instead of paying for these ridiculously expensive tickets where you go to a venue, they charge you X amount of pounds a week to have a spot in their venue. Then they sell tickets and you get a percentage of the ticket money. Which normally, in many cases, is nowhere near enough to cover the costs of the rent, they call it, that you've paid to hire the slot. That instead, there's a new system where basically the venues don't charge people to come in. You've got a bucket at the end of the gig. They put what they want in the bucket, and you get that. And nobody pays to come in, and the venues make their money obviously from the food and drink they sell to the people that come to watch the performances. It's a brilliant idea. It works fantastically, and as long as you've got an audience, it really works from a financial point of view too, because people, they're at the Fringe. To be blunt, mostly they're the kind of middle class people that can afford to pay for a show, and they don't treat me any differently to anyone else for the most part. But those people, but the other side of it, which I find absolutely brilliant, absolutely, is the fact that the work people from the street or people who can never afford to go to a show normally can turn up and pay nothing and just come and see me. And loads of the Edinburgh punks, and I probably get a higher percentage of people with Scottish accents at my shows than most, because I've got a pretty good following there. I have a pretty good following everywhere, really, in the punk scene, in my underground scene. And they know they can come and watch Attila, and if they can afford it, they put some money in. If they can't, they don't have to. That is what is so brilliant about the Free Fringe. I mean, it really is. And that's why I came back. And I'm doing it again this year. It'll probably be my last one this year. I mean, because I'm doing this, show this year is 14 different shows in 14 days. Now I've got enough material to do that. So 14 shows with no song or poem performed more than once. Obviously chronicling the 44 years now that I've been Attila the Stockbroker. So yeah, I mean, but I would say in general, I mean, you've obviously made a big thing about the Edinburgh Fringe, something that you've really wanted to do. I completely understand that. For me, it was never, to be honest, it was never a big deal at all. It was just something that I did and then stopped doing, and now I'm doing again. It's just a couple of weeks having fun. And I'm fortunate enough now to have the aunt of a friend of mine has got a place right in the centre of town. So I can stay with her. So I don't have the problem with the accommodation either, which is the absolute pain in the arse. Before that, I was staying with mates, fans, whatever. It works for me. I'm fortunate. I've got this following, and people have always been pretty supportive of what I do, because they know that I don't have corporate backing and I'm not interested in that, and so it works. Anyway, so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, when I saw your show, I my feedback, like my thoughts on it was, in the same hour, I laughed, I cried, I cheered, I sang along, and I wanted to call my dad as soon as I had a chance. And
Yeah, well,
that was that was how I felt. I loved it. I mean, I loved your show.
well, thank you. I mean, you see, that is the very point of what I do. I always say, we as human beings, we laugh, we cry, we think. I mean, I would literally do, in an hour, I would do a long poem sometimes about my mother's 7-year battle with Alzheimer's. And in the same hour, I will be doing poetry about the fact that I've just become poet in residence of the National Poo Museum. I'll be doing knob gags. I don't know what the American translation of that is, but you know what I mean. Dick jokes.
We know. Yeah, we know.
I'll be doing all kinds of different things. So, and I go from the sublime to the ridiculous, from the very, very stupid to the to the very, very serious in a space of nothing. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I don't want to talk too much about your show to I want people to go see it, but when you talked about the evolution of your relationship with I believe your stepdad, I mean,
Yeah,
that was just really powerful stuff, man. I mean, it brought me to tears, and I wasn't alone. I was looking around at the people sitting
sure.
around me.
Yeah.
And that was
that may be the best poem I've ever done. The point about it is that but each show is different. I've always, I mean, and what I do generally, I mean, because of the very nature of what I do, I can go to different places, different venues, different types of people, different, I can play at a punk gig. I mean, next week I'm going to Ireland. I'm doing a hardcore punk gig in Dublin. I'm doing a kind of theatre show in Belfast. I'm doing a folk club in Derry. And I'm doing 2 gigs in Scotland on the way back. So I don't fly anymore. So I'm driving and then getting the boat across. And every gig's different, and every gig, to some degree, the material will be tailored to the audience that is there. I mean, because some people, if you're doing a gig which is full of punk rockers, they're going to get every single reference. If you do if you're talking about precisely about the early 80s, about the scene, about the violence that was endemic in the system, at that time in the punk scene. And obviously, if you're doing a sort of a more poetry sort of orientated thing, they're not going to, in the main, although obviously if there's people there that know my stuff, they will get both. But it just varies, and it is very, very sort of very varied and very kind of diverse what I do, and the venues that I do, and the whole thing that I do is diverse, and that's what I love about it. And of course, I've got my band. So that's another dimension as well. We're playing, with the band, I can do completely different shows, completely different places, and that works. I mean, and I'm obviously in a rock environment more, but the band also, we can do semi-acoustic or acoustic performances in churches or whatever, doing the early music side of what we do. And we could play a hardcore punk gig with the best of them because we've got an awful lot of really good hardcore punk rock songs. So, it all fits together.
You also incorporated your illness into your show, which thrilled to hear that you beat it. But
It seems to be all right. Yeah, I had bladder
yeah,
cancer. I had bladder cancer, and I mean, I started off writing a poem about well, basically the whole point about what I did after I got this. I went to the doctor straight away when I knew something wasn't right, and I've been treated, and it looks like I'm okay. I have been okay for 9 years. I've been okay for 9 years anyway. So, and the whole point about that was to, above everything, to get people, especially people of my age, who tend not to talk about these things so much, to go to the doctor if there's something wrong with them, and especially given that I had it in my bladder. I could make you could make it funny, the whole thing of the experience of having a camera going where no camera should ever go, and it made it funny. So it was the absolute combination of what I love to do best, which is to just be silly and make a very serious point. I mean, one of probably my favorite, if you like, epithet in the world of performance I've ever heard is actually a quote from Mary Poppins: "A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down." That,
sure.
for me, is absolutely the starting point for what I do. The starting point for what I do. I mean, because if you make people laugh, I mean, this is the point. Well, again, another thing why I have a beef with comedy. Laughing for its own sake. When I make people laugh, I want to make them laugh so that they are ready for the next bit, which isn't going to be funny. So that, when you say that you make them laugh at the beginning, so that then you can do a story or something which maybe isn't full of belly laughs, and they'll trust you. I start off from that premise with what I do because the kind of the atmosphere that you have at a comedy show isn't there. In other words, people are not expecting to be laughing all the time. They're just listening. They expect to be entertained and to make to think and to laugh sometimes. And I obviously quite a lot of what I do is funny. But the whole point is that when I start off, so I can do the funny stuff, if you like, and people are having a good time, and then I do the really serious bit, whether it's about illness or whether it's about personal relationships and reconciliation, or obviously all the unspeakable political shit that's going on in the world that needs to be talked about, and the hypocrisy and the garbage and everything. All these things, they all fit together. So and that's the point. I mean, that's why, for me, as I say, why I stopped being part of the comedy scene, despite the fact that, I could do an hour of funny stuff, funny poems and songs, without any doubt at all. But that would only be a little bit of what I do, and it wouldn't fit into a lot of people's vision of what comedy is now, anyway, because they think of it as being a stand-up sort of stream of consciousness thing. And I don't improvise. I don't have heckle. I mean, I say, heckling. Well, I used to be heckled. I used to have dustbins thrown at me and being attacked on stage by Nazis. That was my. I don't need to be heckled now. I want people to listen to me. That's the whole thing. I've done my stint with hecklers in the early 80s. I don't want that anymore.
So this wasn't on my list to talk about, but because we were kind of talking about it off mic, I kind of wanted to ask you about this. You recently got back from Rome, where you had some things happen with some football fans. So let me premise this by saying, here in the States, kind of like the combination of football and politics is a little bit newer here, where, we have like Portland has a big Antifa following. My favorite team is my favorite US team is a minor league team called the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. And we're
talking what you call soccer here. Yeah. Not American.
Yes. Football. Yeah. We're talking soccer.
With American football, there's no real politics at all, apart from the obvious politics of capitalism. I get that.
No.
I've got to start off by saying that that's similar in the UK. In the UK, apart from Celtic and Rangers, there is very little overt political sort of activity of any kind. It's rather frowned on in our culture. Really, people don't particularly want to see it. Although obviously, what is defined as politics is people's lives, and so it just comes in anyway. But in mainland Europe, absolutely, there are loads and loads of teams with, sadly, too many with far right followings, some with far left followings. We encountered Some of Roma's Roma, we were playing AS Roma, my team, Brighton Hove Albion. First time in Europe, in the European competition. So a really exciting time for us. Got there. Most people had a really good time, but a couple of people got stabbed and robbed, and it's. I mean that. You talk about the Edinburgh Festival, the sort of extra performance thing, which I suppose has had most influence with me of all, is football and my love of Brighton Hove Albion, my team, and the fact that in the 90s we were nearly destroyed by property speculators. And I personally founded the Independent Supporters, co-founded our Independent Supporters Association and led the battle to save the club when we were bottom of the 4th division and our ground had been stolen. And now those of you who follow soccer in the States will know that even if you don't support us, we're in the top, and we're playing Manchester United and Liverpool and those people every week. We finished 6th in the table last year. And I'd always say the battle to save Brighton Hove Albion is the most successful grassroots campaign that I've ever been involved in. And I was poet in residence at the club for many years and was the stadium announcer, match day stadium announcer. In other words, playing the music, so punk, ska and reggae, and announcing the teams and everything. I had a mate who did it with me because I was sometimes off gigging, obviously. But so that's been a very, very important part of my life. And the fact that towards the end of my life, we finally got to play in the sort of major European competitions means a hell of a lot to me. It really does. It really does. I mean, it's a dream come true.
That's incredible. So I'm a little curious. Is Roma then a right-wing team, or is that just some of their following? Or
well, Lazio, the other team, is a really, really fascist, notorious fascist club.
Okay.
Right up to the institutions. It's horrible. Roma used to be a left-wing club, but it's very diverse now. There's still left-wing groups and there's right-wing groups. I personally didn't see any trouble, but I know that some people had some aggro. But I don't really want to talk too much about that, really, because I mean it's like that's an extra sort of thing, really. I mean it's not. I mean if you're interviewing me for this, then the most important thing for me to talk about is my roots and culture in performance and in the punk scene and everything, and we've done a lot of that. So I mean, I've you may know, may not know, I've toured the States 4 times with David Rovix 3 times and with TV Smith once. Very, very interesting, incredibly diverse crowds in terms of number, because we could have a really good crowd one day and then hardly anyone the next. And obviously we went down the East Coast and the West Coast and the bit in the middle. I've never been to the South. Everyone said, "Oh, you can't go down there; they'll hate you." And my response to that is, "Well, there's people that are going to be into it wherever you go.
There are
sensible. The people that turn up. I've toured Canada 6 times. I played the Calgary Stampede once, for God's sake, which is the epitome of the whole sort of, it's like, yeehaw, sort of what you get in Texas or whatever. And I went down fine. Just, I mean, as long as you're sensible and clever, you can do it. And I've toured Australia 4 times, New Zealand 3 times, Canada 6 times, the States 4 times, all over mainland Europe. I speak French and German. So I performed all over the world with this stuff, and I love it. I mean, as a linguist, I especially like performing in Germany because I speak. I toured East Germany before the wall came down 4 times, and that's where I learned German. And I do loads and loads of gigs in Germany now. I do my introductions and bits of my material actually in German, which is
fluent?
A different thing. That's a really, I love that. I speak fluent French, but sadly I don't really have a following in France, so I don't get much opportunity to perform there. But it's still, I love languages. I always have done. It's just a natural thing for me.
So are you fluent in German as well, or conversation?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Ich spreche fließig Deutsch. Je parle couramment français. But I use my German a lot more because of the history of punk and because of the history of the sort of politics and culture there. I've always had because basically the Germans understand English better than the French. So as someone who's known as a performer using words, I obviously the main areas where people are interested in what I do are English-speaking countries, or countries where they speak English very well because their own language is extremely narrow, like say Holland or Scandinavia, where very few people in the world speak their languages, so they all learn English really well. And that obviously is a major thing too, because traveling has always been a big part of what I do. I love performing abroad, I love touring abroad, and it's always meant a lot to me to be able to go to different countries and do this. So I mean,
you think you'll come back to the States? Is it on the list?
No, I've done. I mean, you know, I've done 4 tours. I had a really good time, as with Canada and Australia and New Zealand. You know, there's no. I mean, I've still got the energy levels I've always had in many ways, but I'm very much aware of my limitations now. I feel a little bit vulnerable with all the things that's wrong with me, and I've done that. And the other thing, which is fundamental, is that I absolutely hate flying. If I
Hmm.
tell you that I have done all these different tours, 6 tours of Canada, 4 tours of the States, blah, 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 and I've hated every single minute that I've been on an aeroplane. I mean, that gives you, so that allied to the obvious fact that there is a moral imperative on us all now, in my view, to fly as little as possible. And I'm not saying people shouldn't fly, but since I hate it, since I've done all those things many times, since I've got loads more opportunities, and since now, of course, we can do something like this, and I can communicate with the people that enjoy my stuff. I mean, you know, I mean, on the stats on Spotify or whatever, I mean, obviously the second biggest number of people that listen to my stuff after the UK is Germany, and then it's the US. I've got little pockets of fans everywhere. I've been over there. Quite often, the people that love my stuff didn't hear that I was playing didn't know that I was playing when I was over there. It's quite funny. Yeah, I played in your. Yeah, why haven't you never been here? Well, actually, I've played Pittsburgh or somewhere. I've played there 3 times or twice. You know. Oh,
That's
well,
my hometown.
yeah. Why didn't I know? Well, I mean, fuck. You know. One of the interesting things about touring with David was that I was playing in his circuit, which is
Hmm.
basically sort of the lefty folky circuit, and my audience often didn't know about the gigs because although we tried our hardest, they were promoted in the lefty folky circuit, and for the main in the main area. And of course, at that time, because it was a long time ago, there wasn't as much. You know, the internet didn't go as far as we could. I mean, now it's a lot easier to advertise anywhere you go. I mean, I mean, for somebody like me, there is so much. I would say there is so much shit on social media. Is hideous. But if you use it the right way, if you control it, I mean, I've got a Facebook page with 50,000 followers, and I control those 50,000 followers. I don't allow racism and sexism. I don't allow just mindless trolling or everybody who's on there. You don't have to agree with me, but you have to express your opinions yourselves rather than putting up memes or links. And you have to treat people with respect and decency and be articulate. And on that basis, I'm very proud, I've established a really good community because, as I think you know, you read my stuff sometimes. It started off, I mean, you know, I'm not just somebody who promotes my gigs and puts poems and songs up there. I write a lot about current events and football and all kinds of things. And I do it in a way which people find entertaining, thankfully, to the point where quite a lot of the people on there now, people have never heard of me in terms of a performer. They just enjoy what I write. So they go on my page, and that's great. I love it. I absolutely love that.
Well, and you also, I mean, I've discovered other musicians because of you. I mean, you'll
Yeah.
host people and things like that. Jess
Yeah, I
Silk,
mean,
who was also on the
things,
show.
one of the things that I've always been very happy and proud to do is I've always tried to encourage my fellow performers. I run this festival, Glaston Wick. You know, I've been doing it for 27 years. I put on an awful lot of gigs locally, and you know, one of the things I absolutely love is I've created this network, and there's an awful lot of people that have met each other and gone on to new things because because they through me, which is brilliant, absolutely fantastic, and I love that.
Mhm.
I mean, I do absolutely love it. You know, I am an organizer. I'm highly motivated, got a lot of energy. I tend to really get stuck into things, and as I say, I'm beginning to have to watch it a little bit now. And it's funny because I don't think of myself as being a particular age, but you know, you do. I have to start thinking about that now a little bit. But I'm still firing on all cylinders, and hopefully will continue so for many years.
What does Joe Strummer mean to you? To just
Strummer
kind of
was
put it into
the
words.
well, I mean, you've heard my song Commandante Joe, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that sums it up, really. I mean, I always say my dad was my first influence. He was an amateur comic poet. He died when I was 10. He was, he was, I was writing little poems and songs when I was a little kid. He was 59 when I was born. He retired, you know, soon afterwards. So he was there all the time. My second biggest influence was a Sussex poet called Hilaire Belloc. There was a book of comic poems called Cautionary Tales for Children, which I absolutely loved. Basically, you know, in those early days. Then I got into music and Bolan. I mean, you know, I was 10 or 11. I heard King of the Rumbling Spires, Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'm a huge Mark Bolan fan. Bolan's not known particularly well known in the US, but he was a big star in the UK. It was this sort of very basically proto-punk in a lot of ways, but very, very starting off sort of very acoustic. and became a monster of a rock band. And then the Velvets, Mott the Hoople, David Bowie, and for me, the most important thing, well, as important as the music, was the words. The words were always fundamental and important as well. So I did all of that, and then it was completely when punk happened in '76. It was completely logical to me. But the difference, the extra dimension with punk was that these, people were saying, well, you can do this. You don't have to wait to be signed. You don't have to have an agent. You don't have to have a manager. You can get out there and do it. And that was what was so brilliant, because we all started putting out our own records. And Strummer, to me, Strummer was my greatest inspiration. And I wrote this song, Commandante Joe, because I'm quite sort of unusual in this sense. I never wanted to meet my heroes. And so I never met Strummer. But I thought I would do one day, and then he just died suddenly. I thought I'll put my arm around him one day when we're both 80 and say, thank you, mate. But I mean, it was like, then suddenly he died. So I wrote this song, Commandante Joe, which just sums up how I feel, Although I never met you, I'm so sad to see you go, because you wrote the soundtrack for my life, Commandante Joe. There's actually a Strummer picture in my, if I turn around there, and you can see there's a picture. There's it's a kind of stencil thing that a school kid did of Joe Strummer and gave to me when I had a school gig that I was doing. So I mean, obviously the punk, the Clash. I mean, I've got so many different inspirations in music, but the Clash will be the greatest inspiration of all, along with T-Rex and the Velvets. I mean, I love the Velvets, absolutely love them. I mean, it's one of the things I despair about your country right now. How country which produced John Steinbeck and the Velvet Underground could produce Donald Trump, and this whole and on the other side, the choice between the hideous, ghastly Trump thing and the military industrial complex as represented by Biden. It's just such a ghastly thing, because you'll know exactly what I mean when I say that. I mean, Trump is hideous.
Yeah.
But some of the things that make people revolt against Biden and go to Trump are simply because Biden represents the elite in its most pure and unified military industrial complex, sort of globalist form, and Trump represents it, a nasty sort of America First version of the same thing, pretending that he's going to care about ordinary Americans when obviously he doesn't. But it's and the fact that there is no alternative, the fact that the media, that the corporate world has made it impossible for somebody like Bernie Sanders to really be. I mean, and as with the UK, the fact you have this electoral system where only two people could compete, two parties could compete. Because Bernie Sanders should in a democratic country. The constituency that represents Bernie Sanders, to really, really make it simplistic, the constituency represented by Bernie Sanders, the constituency represented by Joe Biden, and the constituency represented by whatever Ralph Nader and all those things has become, and all the sort of left alternatives, should be able to each vote for its own slate,
right,
and then under a proportional representation system, form a government based on an alliance, instead of it having to be a binary choice between something which is absolutely beyond the pale, unspeakable fascist evil, and something which is domestically much, much better. I think it's fair to say. My assessment of Biden is that for in terms of his domestic policies, much, much better than Trump, obviously. But in terms of the global thing, I mean, God, the business in Palestine is just beyond belief.
Yeah,
absolutely beyond belief.
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up very well. I think much better. I don't think I'd go that far, but he has had a few decent domestic appointments, to the FTC and stuff like that. So there have been.
I mean, but given that this is the only choice, presumably you'd rather Biden than Trump.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you put, I mean, if you're gonna, I mean, we're
do you
fighting.
think there are many people on the left, or of our sort of perspective now, who are literally going to say, I don't, because people in this country are saying between Starmer and Sunak that there's no difference. That's absolutely not true. I mean, that really is not true. I mean, do most people on the left still recognize that there is a difference between Biden and Trump?
Most people on the left the general consensus on the well, I mean, honestly, Attila, I would say there isn't really a general consensus on the left
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
United
sure,
States
yeah,
right
yeah,
now because things are just so divisive.
yeah,
But I think my personal take, and I know many share this, um, is there no difference? No, there's not no difference, but uh, they're not different enough. That's the big problem, which I think is basically what you said too. Like they're not different enough. So what many of us are fighting for is to try to build, kind of an alternative structure like what you're talking
absolutely.
about. And
Yeah,
it depends on and a lot of it, and we don't have to get like too far in the weeds here, but like a lot of it depends on where you live. Like as somebody who lives in California, um the possibilities that are available to me electorally are a little different than somebody who lives in a state with like closed primaries, for instance, where
yeah,
you
sure.
really have to join one of the two parties. You don't really have a
Yeah.
choice.
And one of the things
So
that
it's go ahead.
the thing that is most completely screwed about the US politics, and I am a student of politics and I do understand it, is this electoral college, which obviously
Yeah.
started at the beginnings of the white colonization of America, and it was an attempt to give representation to all areas of the country. And at that time, then there was, I guess, there was some sort of justification for it. But the fact now that, to be blunt, the vote of some redneck in Wyoming is worth that of three college graduates in California is completely ludicrous. The fact that that, I mean, however awful Clinton was, she wasn't as bad as Trump. She won the popular vote, and she didn't get elected. And Trump is saying that Trump is saying that the vote was stolen. This ludicrous vote was stolen thing, when 7 million people voted, more 7 million people majority voted for Biden, and Trump is saying that on the basis that of these putative things at in the electoral college in the swing states. It's the idea that you have an electoral college that can do that is
Yeah.
just completely bizarre, because there's no way that Trump is going to win the popular vote, is there? I mean, not in a million years, is
I
there?
highly doubt it. Yeah, I
There
highly,
is a
highly doubt it.
possibility that he could win via the electoral college with all the gerrymandering and the vote suppression that's going on. And I mean, and I mean, it would be a disaster for them. Looking from the outside, it will be a disaster for the world if Trump gets in again. I mean, some people on the left here say, if the Americans want to vote for him, then that's their business, and at the very least, there won't be so much a ghastly sort of shit going on in the rest of the world, because Trump is America first, and he won't throw
See,
money at
I
Israel
think
or
Trump would continue the same things
yeah.
Biden is doing in that regard. I mean, he really would.
Yeah.
He said he would. He
Oh,
said
yes.
he I mean, yeah, I mean, he said he would. I mean,
He, he's just said that he wouldn't give another penny to Ukraine or something. Is that, have you heard that? I mean, was that somebody else saying that? I mean, I don't know. I just heard a headline today. I don't know whether it's. I don't know.
well, he definitely said he would continue what's going on in Gaza. I mean,
Right.
he has made it out like Biden hasn't been hawkish enough in that
Well,
regard, which
I mean,
is
Jared
again,
Kushner and all that are obviously totally, in with Netanyahu. I mean, that's clear. Absolutely, totally clear. It's the whole thing. I mean, right around the world now, is the rise of the far right is absolutely frightening. And given that I was born in 1957, so 12 years after the end of the Second World War, we defeated the shit the first time round. Given that I fought it on the street literally in the 80s, I mean, it's for somebody like me to see this coming back is just disgusting. And I mean, we have it in the UK as well. I mean, I think Labour is going to win the election. I mean, I think I've told you my wife is a Labour councillor, and I'm in the Labour
yes.
Party, but very much clinging on with what's going on at the moment. But
Well, what exactly is, because I know that, and again, like there's I mean, you have way more insight into American politics than I can as far as UK politics. I usually get it from musicians I like, to tell you the truth. But
yeah,
I know that Labor started kind of going in a like during the Blair days, they almost started going in the American direction of not really representing the people at all. And now it seems like Labor is kind of becoming more grassroots again. Is that accurate, or is that happening in
well,
pockets? Like,
that was accurate what you said. First, it was accurate. Became a lot more grassroots when Jeremy Corbyn was elected in 2017. we had a big movement to win the 2016, sorry. We had a big movement to win the 2017 election. We lost narrowly. And then we lost, and then 2019 we lost heavily because the right-wing media really came down on Corbyn, and now Starmer is basically making the Labour Party much more right-wing. A lot of people have been expelled for being on the left because basically the press in the UK is so right-wing. It's the press. The worst thing about the UK is the press. It is. I mean, it's my generation who win elections, and sadly, it is the over 60s who vote in the majority and who are the most right wing, and they read right wing newspapers. And it just, I mean, I think people of my age are about a 35% majority, whereas people of 20, there's about 1% they're going to vote Tory. It's just unbelievable. You know, I mean, I write a lot about how my generation took all the very benefits from, you know, I grew up in a working class family. I was the first person in my family to go to university. I went there on a full grant. You know, I had all the opportunities that the welfare state provided. And now my generation is taking that away from their own children and grandchildren. It's disgusting. Anyway, mate, I've got to go soon.
Oh yeah. No, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So yeah.
So I mean, what I want you to do now is just basically, if there's anything else that you want to ask me, anything else specifically you want to talk about, connected with obviously what I do for a living or with what you do and with our culture generally, then I'm happy to answer it. I mean,
I think we covered it. In closing here, just tell anyone who might not be familiar where they can find you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm all over Facebook. If you do Facebook, you just put Attila the Stockbroker into Facebook, you'll find me, and there will be all my stuff. I do use the streaming media. I'm on Spotify. Just put Attila the Stockbroker into Spotify. I'm on YouTube. Likewise, I've got a huge amount of material out there. I mean, all my albums are available for downloading and streaming and listening to. I'm also on Bandcamp. If you want to buy stuff, that's all there too. There's a huge resource of what I do on the internet. So if you're interested in what I've said, check it out. And you know, hi to everybody all over who's listening to this. You know, I don't think I'll be coming back to the States. I've had some bloody good times there, and like you, I really did see I do get the good and the bad sides of the place. I'm not for somebody from the UK, you get people that think especially on the left, think everything American is evil and disgusting. I certainly don't think that. And then you get the other side who think that everything American is wonderful, and I certainly don't do that. You know, I have a very even-handed. You know, I recognise the wonder and the beauty and the fantastic achievements that have happened in America, and I also recognise the utter shit that has started with the very first colonisation in the 16th century. You know, so anyway, I'm off. I need to go. Ron, it's lovely talking to you, mate. Very best of luck. You know, and we'll meet up again when you come over for the Edinburgh Fringe.
Absolutely, count on it. Thank you very much, Attila.
That's great. Lovely.